Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. So on today's video, we will be discussing the assumptions to VLOOKUP and how we can execute VLOOKUP in an efficient manner in the Excel sheet. So I would highly recommend you to watch my video on locking of formulas in Excel so that you can execute VLOOKUP in a very error-free manner in your Excel sheet. With that said, let's get to the video. So I have created two datasets to illustrate the working of VLOOKUP function. So VLOOKUP function is very useful when you have datasets, when you have multiple datasets and you want all the data to be in a single dataset. So we would be accumulating our entire data in the source dataset itself, and we have this lookup data. So this data is basically about the employee IDs. So these are the employee IDs of several employees, which have names as James, Sean, Michael, etc. And in the lookup data, we have the age and salary of the people mapped against their employee ID. So we want age and salary in the same dataset itself. So we want one single data in which we have the names, age, and salary for corresponding to all employee IDs. So before we move on to the implementation of VLOOKUP, I just want to discuss the assumptions to VLOOKUP. So the first assumption to VLOOKUP is that the employee ID or the primary key that we are using to look up both the data sets should be unique. It should not have duplicate values in it. The second assumption to using the VLOOKUP is that this employee ID primary key column should be sorted in the ascending order ideally. So these are the best practices. The third assumption is that this should be the leftmost column. The primary key should be the leftmost column in your dataset, basically in your lookup dataset. So let us suppose if I have some data into this column as well. So I cannot look up, I cannot map that data because employee ID is present to the right of this data. So if I have values over here, let us say if I have any other data regarding the employees, like their last names or any other row, so I cannot look up to that. So this employee ID should be the leftmost column. So I have discussed all these assumptions in detail in my video of limitations to VLOOKUP. You can basically refer that video as a detailed guide. And so let's get started. So there are basically two methods to implement the VLOOKUP function. The first one is to use the insert function button over here. So I will be first illustrating that and then I will move to the second part. So let me just click on insert function. So you can basically search for VLOOKUP function if the VLOOKUP function is not available in this box. Since it is already available in my box, so I will directly click on VLOOKUP. Otherwise, you can just type in VLOOKUP and press the button go. So you will be able to have this function selected. So once I do that, I press OK. So I will be then directed to a prompt which will ask me four important parameters that we require for the VLOOKUP to function. So we will be discussing them like in a sequential manner. So the first function is the first parameter is the lookup value. So lookup value is basically the value that you want to look up. So for example, in my case, I want the age of employee ID 3452 in this cell C5. So basically the lookup value over here is the employee ID 3452. So what I will do is I will just click this button. I will select the employee ID 3452 and then that is now entered into this lookup value. So this lookup value can be a text, this can be a cell reference, this can be a hard coded value. So for to make my formula dynamic, I'm using the cell reference. Similarly, moving on to the second parameter, which is the table array. Table array is basically the address of the lookup data. So, into this parameter, I will be entering the cell address of the lookup data. So, from where I want to look up the age value itself. So, I will click over here, and this is the table that I want to look up from. So, I will select this data, and the most important part is that I will have to lock this range of cells, because if I drag down this formula, my range will also will also be dragged down. So in order to understand this in detail, I have made a detailed video on locking of the rows and cells, which you can watch. So I will be locking the range of cells. So I will press F4, or in some laptops it is function plus F4. So you can choose to whatever works best for you. So Once I have logged the range of cells, we are done with the second parameter. The third parameter to VLOOKUP is the column index number. This is basically the column number of the data that you want to populate in your source dataset and the column number of that data in your lookup dataset. So this seems to be a very complex statement. So let me simplify that for you. So in our lookup data, if employee ID is the first column and age is the second column and salary is the third column, and I am looking up age. So since age is the second column, I would be mentioning over here 2. If I want salary, I would be mentioning this parameter as 3. So this is the gist of the complex statement that I went ahead earlier. So with that done, we move on to the fourth parameter, which is kind of optional because since it is, as you can see that all the other are in bold because they are mandatory for you to fill in, but this option is optional parameter. But in this optional parameter also, you should, the best practice is to mark it as false. So there are two options to it. You can mark it as true or false, but when I select true, it will give me the approximate match. But I don't want the approximate match. I will be needing the exact match in like almost all of my cases. So it is the best practice to mark this one as false. So once I mark this one as false and I press OK, I will see that the age of James has been populated as per this lookup data. So corresponding to employee ID 3452, the age was 31, which is being populated over here. So if I drag this formula down, I would see that the age of all the employee IDs have been populated correctly. And if I touch upon a scenario in which I would not have logged this range, which I did earlier, if I forget to log this range, let's say I unlock this range. So what will happen is once I enter it, my this value will show me the correct numbers, but when I drag this down, it will show me incorrect numbers. This is because my range keeps on moving down while dragging the formula. So let's say you had this range. So basically you are looking up this entire data in the cell C5, but on moving down, your range is also moving down, which is why the bottommost rows have NA or are showing as error because your range has moved down significantly. So to avoid this, I was locking the entire range. So in order to understand this phenomena in a detailed manner, you can refer to the locking of formula video on our channel so that you have a much more clarification about when to lock columns and when to lock rows and when to lock both while you're specifying ranges. So let me just undo this and we have the VLOOKUP in place for the age column. Similarly, we will be applying VLOOKUP for the salary function as well. So instead of using the insert function method, I would be just directly typing in VLOOKUP. So this is the second method as to how you can use the VLOOKUP function. Since we are now aware of the four parameters, I will be doing it directly in the cell itself. So the lookup value is A5 that I want to look up. So I will mention A5 over here. The table array is again our lookup data. So this is that. Let me log this again since I have already told you that we need to log the entire range always. Whenever we are using any functions like we look up index matches, sum ifs, we always want to log the ranges both on both of the levels like rows and columns. So the third will be the salary. So you want to look up salary, which is the third column in this lookup data set. Since the first column is employee ID, the second column is age, and the third column is salary. So I would be mentioning over here as 3. And then once we are done with that number, so there are two options which I can select in the fourth optional parameter. So true will give me the approximate match. I don't want the approximate match because approximate matches are not 100% efficient, not 100% correct in all the scenarios. So we always use the false as the fourth parameter, which gives us the exact match. So once I'm done with that, I will close my brackets. I will press enter, and then I will drag this down, and this way I have the salaries also of several employees in the same dataset itself. So now I have the names, age and salary of all the employees in one single dataset itself, and I don't want to look up to this data. So this is how you can use VLOOKUP efficiently. brings us to the end of today's episode. So I will highly recommend you to watch my video on limitations to VLOOKUP so that you are aware of all the scenarios where VLOOKUP could land you in trouble. So thank you for watching, and I will see you soon in the next video.